Welcome back to another GTN Coaches Corner where we answer your questions. Let's get straight into your questions. First one from Aldoda. Hashtag GTN Coaches Corner. I find gym really boring. Can I swap my classic strength training with a full body HIIT class? For triathlon preparation, yes, definitely. Just follow the same principles as your classic gym session. That is, don't overdo it. Adjust the load as you adapt to it, and do all the movements with good form. This might be something that triathletes struggle with. Don't go into push-ups and things like that with poor form, because you'll soon have an injury of some sort, a shoulder injury or hip injury or something like that. So if you're going to do them properly. The first few sessions, make sure that you tone it back a little bit. Don't go straight into as hard as you possibly can. I know triathletes love doing that, and if it's not hurting, it's not working. But trust me, take it slowly on the HIIT sessions to start with, build up gradually, and you will get benefits from it without getting injured. Next question, Henry says, should I use gels to fuel on longer runs and rides, or can I get away with using drinks or maybe cookies to get the carbs in? I know it's important to get used to fueling on longer efforts, but energy gels are quite expensive, and I'm a broke 17-year-old. Is it necessary to specifically get used to gels because that's what they are provided on race day? Yes and no. You don't want to use anything new on race day, and that is a good rule to stick to, and it is definitely something that you want to stick to when it comes to gels. You don't want to take a gel you've never experienced before halfway through the run and find that the flavor doesn't agree with you, or even worse, some of the contents don't agree with you, and you ruin your whole race because you took a gel your body didn't like. So you do need to practice with what's going to be available on race day. However, you don't need to do all your sessions with that. You just need to have tested it at some point, maybe in a race-specific session. The rest of your sessions, particularly your long rides, you can take anything that's appealing to you, anything that fits in your pockets, anything that is not going to mess up your stomach. Obviously, the last point there, anything that's not going to mess up your stomach, gets a little bit more complicated when it comes to runs, because obviously things don't sit so well in your stomach when you're running. So you need to be a bit more careful than you do on the bike. But again, you don't have to use expensive sports gels and stuff. You can use things like jelly babies and cookies, and stroop waffles are a favorite of mine, to get you through those long runs. You don't have to use gels in every one, but if you are going to use gels on race day, make sure you've tested them before you head out there on race day. Next question from Nicholas Lloyd. Hashtag GTN Coaches Corner. I have one huge problem when it comes to swimming, pacing. Basically, when I jump into the pool, I can choose between 3 intensities consciously. Really hard, moderately hard, and really easy. Everything in between just seems non-existent, or at least when I try to change the intensity pace, it doesn't really show on the clock. As a result, I start 1,000 meter interval the same intensity. I do a 2,000 meter interval because I have no feel for it whatsoever. Do you have any tips to develop a better feel for the different paces and how to actually access them? Also, does a CSS test make any sense when you cannot really see a difference between the 200 meter and 400 meter pace? Okay, this is very common. And it is because of the same thing we say all the time when it comes to swimming on the Coach's Corner. It's all about technique. What is happening is this: when you swim, you have this default pace. This is the pace that you do most of your training at. It's where you're most comfortable, and you get really fit at that pace. It's your perfect balance of work output to forward momentum, and that's where you're just going to default to every time. That's probably your moderately hard pace. You can also swim really easy if you really don't try and you just kind of float along, but I'm willing to bet that you feel significantly less comfortable doing this and you feel like you're wobbling all over the place. And then you can swim really hard, which is where you just thrash the water as hard as you can. It's very inefficient and you can't do it for very long whatsoever. Changing this does come down to technique. It changes your feel for the water. What you want to be able to do is add 5% and actually go 5% faster, catch 5% more water, add 10% and actually push 10% more water, go 10% faster, 20% in the same. What you're doing now is you're adding 20% more effort and you're pushing 20% more water, but you're losing 20% economy, and so 20% more effort equals the exact same pace. And that's obviously what you need to practice. The key to this is obviously improving your stroke, so getting that technique advice, getting someone to look at your stroke and make sure that you are improving that technique, but also making sure that the hard work you do, you only do it with good technique. You don't swim hard for 100 meters and the last 50 to 75 meters of that, you're just reinforcing bag technique, you're spilling the water all over the place, you're pushing water, but you're not going any faster forward. Do your hard stuff in very short intervals to start with, 25 meters, 50 meters at most, and then take a break and do the next one properly again. That way you're reinforcing good technique without falling apart and reinforcing a bad technique. And then, of course, as I say, you do need to work on that technique so that when you pull harder, 20% harder with your arm, you're actually pushing 20% more water. You're not just moving your arm 20% faster through the water, but going just as fast. That is where the whole key lies. Swimming's a technique sport. More effort doesn't translate to more speed unless your technique's good. Next question. Monsieur Villa says, hashtag GTN Coaches Corner, running related question. Is zone 2ism becoming a cult? And if I have to pick one, zone 2, threshold or tempo, which one should I pick or prioritize? Unfortunately, sometimes for time reasons, being able to do everything is complicated. Zone 2ism probably is becoming a bit of a cult. Just don't drink the Kool-Aid and you'll be fine. Okay, you don't have to pick one. You're going to fit all of them in your week, I'm sure. And if you do just pick one and you only do zone 2, you definitely won't get as many advantages of doing the right balance between some zone 2, some threshold, some tempo. Doing only zone 2 is probably not the answer for most people. The zone 2 phenomenon, or the zone 2 cult, as you call it, has come about because people do all of their sessions too hard. They do all of them in zone 3 or zone 4, and they feel like they're not working if they don't go hard and feel like their heart rate's going and feel like they're breathing hard and feel like they're sweating a lot. So they do all their work in zone 3, and then they go and try and do a marathon or an Ironman, and they end up doing most of the race in zone 2, which they haven't trained, and they're very inefficient and slow, basically. So that's why zone 2 has come about. However, that doesn't mean you have to do all your running in zone 2. It doesn't mean you have to do all your sessions in zone 2. It doesn't mean you have to even do the majority of your sessions in zone 2. If you do have to add one more session to the week, it kind of depends on what you did already in the week. I would say if you are adding sessions to your week, if you're only doing one session, your first session you do should probably be a tempo session, if you're only doing one. If you're adding another session to your week, that second one should probably be zone 2. If you're adding a third session to your week, now it's time probably to do some high intensity stuff, to do some threshold stuff, not just zone 2. And then if you're adding more, if you're adding a fourth session, zone 2 again, you need more zone 2. And if you're adding 5, zone 2 again. And if you're adding a sixth one, then you can probably do another tempo session. And if you're adding a seventh one, you should probably have a rest day. And that's probably how you should add them. Not necessarily do them in that order, but that's how you add them. If you're doing 1, 2, 3 sessions, that's the order you should add them. If you're adding any more than that, you're getting into double run days, which we're not going to discuss here today. So yeah, do one of each, and then after that, prioritize zone 2 for the rest of your training for the week. But don't just do zone 2, zone 2, zone 2, zone 2, because that's also not an effective way to get the most training out of yourself. Next question. Chris Blake, hashtag GTN Coaches Corner. Hi guys, I'm wondering if it's worth switching up my swimming stroke to breathe in every 2. I grew up swimming and was taught to breathe every 3 strokes, and that feels very comfortable for me. I tried breathing every second stroke, and it just feels really messy and hard to get into a good rhythm. Now in my late 30s and just getting into triathlon, it's heaps of fun, but wondering if it's worth spending the time to make the switch, or should I just stick with what I'm used to? I'm a reasonable swimmer, generally comfortably around 130 per 100 for 1500 meters. It's definitely my best discipline of the 3, so I don't want to mess with it if it's not worth it. If I should switch over, do you have any tips for making the transition? Thanks very much. Okay, yeah, any change to your breathing pattern is going to feel awkward. Whatever you're used to is going to be much more comfortable than that change. However, it could be worth actually making that switch. The main advantage of breathing every 2, and the reason that most pro swimmers and pro triathletes breathe every 2, is simply because you can breathe more. You can get more oxygen in. Now, there are a certain number of people who have a very fast stroke who might actually find that breathing every 2 feels a bit like hyperventilating, even when they're swimming hard and at their max and near their threshold. But for most people, simply being able to get more oxygen in, breathing every 2 versus every 3, literally 50% more breathing, is going to make you faster overall, because that oxygen debt is the thing that's starting to slow you down as you start swimming harder and harder. So changing your pattern to breathing every 2 might actually be advantageous, no matter how efficient you are at breathing every 3, unless you have a really fast stroke. If you are going to do it, this is how you do it. Start gradually. Start with just 25 meters of breathing to one side or the other side, the most comfortable side, and then switch back to your normal breathing pattern for a while. And then do another 25 meters, etc. Do it in small doses. And then as you build up, you'll get more and more comfortable with it. Don't expect to just be able to flick a switch and suddenly be able to breathe every 2 and be comfortable with it. It will take some time. However, as I say, the benefits can be quite substantial, especially in a triathlon where the chop might be coming from one side or the wind might be coming from one side. We might even have a competitor splashing you from that side and you want to breathe only to one side. And of course, if you want to swim a threshold 1500 meter, you're probably going to find that breathing every 3, unless you have a fast stroke, is starting to be the breathing, getting enough oxygen is starting to be the limiting factor. And then breathing every 2 is going to make you faster over that. So I would work on it. It's definitely another quiver in your arsenal when it comes to actually racing that triathlon. So it's worthwhile spending some time trying to master it. Next question. Jasper1234 says, #GTN Coaches Corner. When running tempo increases, what is the most aero position? For example, where should have my hands and elbows? Has there been wind tunnel testing? And also, when is the Global Running channel coming? Well, we try and cover the running as much as we can here on GTN. I hope we tick all the boxes. If we don't, if there's something running related you want us to do, leave it in the comment section down below. We'll try to get to it. As for aero, when you're running, don't worry about it. Seriously, don't worry about it. There have been studies looking at this, particularly with elites and drafting in a marathon, drafting in a 5,000 meter and 10,000 meter. And actually at 3 minutes 45 per kilometer, drafting another runner can save you like 9% economy, maybe 7% in your efficiency. So it is worth doing at those high paces, drafting another runner. But as far as changing your run form to get more aerodynamic, it is almost certainly going to be a negative sum game. You're not going to gain anything because you're going to lose some economy, some efficiency from what you're used to by changing your arm position, changing your arm carriage, changing your lean, so you're leaning more further forward or something like that. You're not going to gain as much as you lose in that efficiency, that economy that you're used to. So it's simply not worth it. If you are looking for some tips and tricks on what to do with your arms when you're running, we did actually make a video not too long ago called the Aero Chicken Drummer, which is 3 little keywords on what you should do with your arms. Aerodynamics doesn't actually come into it, but the chicken arms need to be, you can watch the video. It's good little cues, and I think it probably make you a little bit more efficient runner, especially with your arms. But yeah, don't worry about aerodynamics. If you are worried about it, the most efficient thing you can do with that is wear some really tight clothing. So go out for your run in your tri-suit and you'll be faster. And that's it for our questions for this week. If you have your own questions, anything about triathlon, down below, #GTN Coaches Corner. Next week, we could be answering your question. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.